Welcome to D&D.
Not that D&D.
I'm Eller the Disciple.
I'm Tally the Dissenter.
And we are going to have some reactions today. Or you're going to give me videos and I'm going to react.
I've seen these videos. So they're TikToks, actually.
So you're going to also react. Or at least talk about your reactions when you saw it.
Because the reason it's a blind react for you is because this has something to do with some of the things we talked a little bit previously about critical thinking and how sometimes people don't want you to use those muscles in certain situations. I feel like these could possibly irritate you.
That's what I'm kind of expecting.
But not maybe for the reasons you think. I don't know.
Okay.
I will be very curious to see your reaction to this because with my life experience, these were like very relatable. There's a whole series. Like most people on TikTok, it started off with like one video and now they've made a whole series of it. We're not going to react to all of them. That would take too long. We'll see how many we get through and we'll just go from there. And if it gets a good response, we can react again in the future. So
okay.
Maybe we'll continue it if it doesn't drive you too crazy.
I'm willing to give it a try.
Okay.
And then God sent a beautiful rainbow as a promise that he would never flood the world ever again. Isn't that wonderful? Miss Stormpus? Yes, Jimothy? Why did God have to send a flood? Why couldn't he just make the bad people nice? Well, he couldn't just make the people nice because it's very important to God that we all have free will. Yes, Jimothy. But if he wanted them to have free will, then why did he punish them like that? Well, Jimothy, actions have consequences. That's why you should only use your free will for good. Yes, Jimothy. So then it was more important for them to have their free will than to have their lives? I just don't get it. He wanted them to have choices, but then he sent a flood and took every choice away from them. Well, yes, but... And if God knows everything, then why did he even make Adam and Eve in the first place if he knew he was going to flood everyone? He could have just started with Noah, right, Miss Jorpus? I think God has his reasons, Jimothy. But we don't know those reasons? No, Jimothy. He works in mysterious ways, and we can't know why he does everything he does. Well, if we can't know why he does what he does, how do we know that his reasons are good? We are all out of time for questions today, but I hope you guys will come back next week so that we can go over how God impregnated Mary with himself.
Okay. So?
Well, this is funny in some ways. And I can see both sides of this, so it's one that I'm like, you know, I would say I don't have a real like solid reaction. That was funny that he kept asking questions. And I'm like, you're like every Sunday school teacher's nightmare. Yeah. And so that's where my brain goes.
Just like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just again, I want to explain why it was like relatable to me. And it goes back to being a kid in Sunday school and having that kind of, I've always been a naturally curious person, and like a lot of these questions were like discouraged and not really like given any sort of weight and or taken seriously, or everything was very much taught by like the stories we read in the Bible are fact, and there was no room for anything else.
So I think that's the fallacy in certain ways of approaching teaching the Bible. And I've been reading a different book, different author, rereading it actually.
So proud of you.
Rob Bell and What is the Bible? And I love some of his I love a lot of his commentary. I won't just say some of it. Recently, just had a whole conversation around the flood stories or listen to one of the chapters about it. It feels like a conversation when you do an audio book. So I kind of love that.
So I like podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. The point I took away from it was that there had been all of these cultures and religions that all had flood stories. the gist of those stories was that God was angry with people, and that's why people died. So that's not anything new to Christianity. That's kind of something
Why do
that's
we do
been,
that?
I don't know. I don't know because I think it's attributing. So maybe I have an idea. It's attributing our humanity to something that we believe is divine and not being able to fully comprehend it. That's where my brain goes. The point with the different flood stories is the Christian, or the time, it was not Christian, it was Judaism. That story went a different place with God because after the flood, God made a covenant with humanity to not do that again. And that was unique to Judaism.
Okay, but we do have floods, and people do die.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
really doubt that that was a flood that flooded the whole world. It was just,
Yeah.
it was a big flood. And they knew this tiny part of the world. In Good Omens, where they meet up at the flood with Noah and stuff, and Aziraphale's telling Crowley that he's gonna like flood the whole place and kill them all, and he's like, really, all of them? And he's like, well, just this part of the world. I don't think God's mad at the Chinese or what.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
Like, what? So, and I mean, I think the thing with why there's flood stories is because we've had these natural disasters, and prior to really having that understanding, I mean, I don't want to get wrapped up in the flood story. I think the overall thing is about how we do teach the mythos as reality.
Where he goes, and I kind of like this, is the idea that our understanding of God could evolve. And that is interesting because it does allow for different interpretations and having conversations about it rather than here's everything as a fact, to your point. Here's everything as a fact, and this all really happened, and this is how it must be understood. It is my understanding that in the Jewish tradition, they had more of a history of this is one way something could be understood, and there would actually be debates about how things could be interpreted. And I think that's what we need to be opening up.
Okay. Well, let's continue on our silly little.
Then God banished Adam and Eve from the garden, and that is how sin entered the world. Miss Jormpus? Yes, Jimothy. Did God know that the snake was going to tempt Eve? Well, God knows everything, Jimothy, so I would have to say yes. So then why did God put the snake there in the first place? Well, unfortunately, you can't have good without evil, and Adam and Eve chose evil. So then does that mean that there's evil in heaven? No, but you just said heaven is perfect. Evil could not exist there. So then why couldn't God just make earth like heaven without evil? Because you can't have good without evil. But you just said... I know what I said, Jimothy. Yes? If God knew they were going to do it anyway, why didn't God just forgive them and tell them to not do it again? I think that God had a bigger plan for the bigger picture, and things had to go that way for the sake of everything else. So then they were punished for doing what he planned. I'm sorry, we're out of time for questions this week, but come back next week and I'll tell you the story about God sending bears to maul children.
So that one, I have to say, it was one of my first questions that I dealt with, okay, so God knows everything, because that's what we were taught. It was omniscient, omnipresent. What is the other one?
It's been so long since I've used those words
Okay.
that I have to think about.
You're like, I'm not sure.
Omniscient, omnipresent,
I don't know.
and all power. It's all powerful, I think, but I don't know what the omni part of that is. There are three omnis, or the three O's.
Terrible.
Like that.
But I remember that was one of my first questions from like everything I learned. Like, okay, so God knew that people were going to, he decided to put this tree here in the garden. He made the garden. He made Adam and Eve. He put the tree with the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. He knew that they were going to eat from it. and he did it anyway. I mean, why didn't he just put the garden on the moon, or put the tree on the moon where the people couldn't get to it? Like it always, that was like the questions I had when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was like, well, if he knew it was going to happen, then why did he just like change it? It seems weird to me. It's like, I understand, and I know you're going to probably play into that free will thing, but it's like, I feel like that's a cop out in some ways, because it's like, yeah, but he also chose to put that there, and he knew what was going to happen anyway. And I don't know. It seems really weird. It's like, my kid has free will to like do whatever and like can touch a hot stove or something, but it's my job to be like, oh no, hot stove. And so I try to like make sure that my house is in a way that it's like safe, and my child's not going to go up and touch a hot stove. I don't know. It just, that definitely was one of my first questions I had. So,
and I think that's the thing. You're getting to the problem with how we teach this stuff. And I think that has a lot to do with the problems that get created. We've had this fundamental Christianity that has said this is what this means, and doesn't leave room for looking at the story and seeing perhaps the learning that could come from that story. And to your point, if we looked at the story of Adam and Eve as a learning opportunity instead of a this is actually what happened, and if you're not careful it's going to happen to you too kind of thing, because I kind of think it has that whammy
I don't know.
factor.
I just always thought they were looking for an excuse to oppress women.
Well, that's a whole different thing. If you looked at the story and you said, human nature is usually when you tell us not to do something, that's what we do. The brain is kind of wired on the verbs. And so when you say don't jump in the water, the brain hears jump in the water because it heard the verb.
You go, hey,
hold back.
I need you to stay out of the water right now. Or
yes, exactly. And we've talked about this. This is something when I think you were a little older, I started realizing, oh my gosh, this is so dumb that we say don't do this.
Oh yeah, I very much work in the action kind of.
Yeah, just say, oriented. What do you want to do? I need you to hold on for a minute, or I need you to wait, or I need you to sit. And people listen to that so much better. I mean, it's not fail-proof because we still have our own instincts to act. But if you could look at that story and understand, okay, this is really a commentary on human nature, and stop ascribing things to God that maybe we don't have the right to speak out about. Because that's the other thing I'm really coming to appreciate more recently from some of the Richard Rohr and Brian McLaren teachings, where they talk about there's a lot of hubris for speaking out and saying, well, this is the way God is, when we have no idea. In 1 minute, one breath, we can say God is mysterious and I don't understand God. Oh, but by the way, and here's all the prescriptive rules about God. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, I think we should continue.
Yeah.
There might be, other things we kind of touch on.
Miss Stormpus? Yes, Jimothy. The tree in the garden was called the tree of knowledge, right? Actually, it was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yes, Jimothy. So then, before Adam and Eve ate from the tree, how were they supposed to know that eating from it was evil? Because God is good, and God told them not to do it. But how would they know God is good if they didn't have knowledge of good and evil yet? He's the one that gave them life. Why would they possibly think he was evil? But if they don't know what good and evil are, how would they know? They knew, Jimothy. They knew. Uh-huh. If they didn't know what good and evil was yet, how would they know that the snake was being evil? Because they knew the snake wasn't God, Jimothy. But how would they know that God and the snake weren't both good? And why was them getting knowledge considered a bad thing? Wouldn't the snake encouraging them to have knowledge be a good thing anyway? If God made us in his image, why didn't he want us to be knowledgeable like him? Miss Stormpus, do you think the snake could have been the good guy in the story and God the bad guy? Unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but come back next week and I'll tell you the story of how God turned a woman into salt.
So that one I like, just of like the whole, how would they know? And I think in some ways it goes back to kind of what you were just saying about having that hubris and like trying to ascribe it to something you may not understand, but also that we tell these stories, and the critical thinking part is the okay, but that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like if we were doing XYZ thing now, like we would think of it differently. Or in the case of that, it's like your child doesn't know that they shouldn't touch a hot stove until they learn that they shouldn't touch a hot stove. And that can be learned a couple different ways. Sometimes it sucks and they accidentally touch it and they get hurt. Or you're able to go, oh, this is hot and you could get hurt. And or they might see somebody else. One of the better things is like if they, well, not better, but like if they see someone else experience something and learn from that, that is something it's really interesting to think of that in that particular creation story. I think that it's just one of those things that many people who have been through deconstruction have talked about, this whole thing that we have witnessed as people in the church who saw like this, I'm not sure what the word is, but kind of this blind allegiance, I guess, to this story being fact. I mean, sort of what I had mentioned.
Yeah.
Is this really fact? Well, maybe we shouldn't change it that way. Maybe it's like, this is just a story that we tell. Maybe this is something we can learn about why this story was created. Maybe the story was created, again, a good way to blame women for original sin. And, you know, not have any more nuanced conversation about the reality of like, why was that there in the first place? If they like, how did they actually know God was good if they had no knowledge of good and evil? All these things that it's like, yeah.
Well, and I love one aspect of this. I'm going to digress a little bit, but I heard somebody actually preach this one time about it really wasn't Eve's fault because Adam was the one that God had told that to, and Adam told it to Eve. So if Eve had done it and Adam had said, wait, God told us not to, and so said no to Eve, could have actually changed the whole story. Now, that's going a little bit different where we're going with this, but I want to say I really had to give kudos to the preacher that preached that, because it was like, yeah, let's put that back on the men, because they could have stopped that train.
No, but honestly, so if you look at that, we still kind of use that boys will be boys excuse, like as if there's so many times that men, like look at rape culture in general, where we like blame non-men for like what they were wearing or whatever, and their own assault, and anyway, that we just blame them for what happens to them instead of putting it on the person who violated them. And it's like, no, you are responsible for your actions.
Exactly.
I'm attracted to all genders, and I have never once assaulted anyone. Like,
exactly.
if I can keep it in my pants, so can you.
So I would say that there are people out there willing to at least do that. And so I want to give kudos to that. But that being said, yeah, I mean, I think that's a very high possibility that there was this way of just like, we're just going to blame that, and just it becomes just like an easy dismissive kind of answer of like, well, Eve and Adam, or Adam and Eve, you know, instead of looking at that story and going, you know, this is one way to understand how the world is, but it's not a complete story. There definitely are questions and holes, and there should be other conversations.
I think for me, this is one of those things that makes me go, this is how I know that the Bible was not written by God themselves. This is not okay. And granted, I know that some of it's like product of its time, whatever. We're still dealing with the huge ramifications of the misogyny from the very first creation story in the Bible. And granted, I think there were other creation stories in Judaism. There were other stories. I know that there's also like other stories of like Adam had a wife before Eve. And that is...
Oh, I was not familiar with
that. It's a Jewish story. I'm not... As somebody who isn't Jewish, I don't know that, like, I don't have a particular expertise on that, and I don't know that I feel comfortable enough to
That's fair.
explain it. There's been times it's been used in popular culture that Jewish people have spoken against, being like, this is really not okay that you're using our stories in this way. So I would say, if you want to know more, I want to find a Jewish person to refer you to.
I think that's fair.
And
I think that's fair. And that's really in line with what we'd like to do here anyway.
Yeah.
So, well, should we go on to the next video?
Yeah.
And on the third day, Jesus rose from the grave in all his glory. And that is why we celebrate Easter. Yes, Jimothy. So he was only gone for 3 days? Yes, but he suffered plenty. But then he came back. Yes, after giving the ultimate sacrifice of his life. Yes, Jimothy. But if Jesus is God, then he sacrificed himself to himself, right? Jesus was fully God and fully human. So he sacrificed himself to himself, right? He didn't have to save us at all, Jimothy, but because of his mercy. Save us from what, though? From our sins, Jimothy. Were you not listening to me at all? But if God's in charge of everything, then why do we have to be born into sin in the first place? He could have just made it to where... Because when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they brought sin into the world. Exactly, Jimothy. So then why did God put the tree there in the first place if he knew that they were going to eat from it? You just have so many questions. Yeah, I don't like being this confused. It's understandable, Jimothy. God is beyond our comprehension. Uh-huh. Well, if God is beyond our comprehension, then how do we know anything about him at all? Because he sent us the Bible, Jimothy. But how do we know that he sent us the Bible? Because, Jimothy, the Bible says... But how do we know what the Bible says is... Because you just have to have faith, Jimothy. All right.
I hate to be that Sunday school teacher because the thing is that they get so ingrained like in their thinking that they don't even know how to back the train up. They're just like, this is just what I'm supposed to teach you.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So it's horrible for them because
because we don't, I don't know,
you don't know how to have the critical thinking.
It's interesting
and say,
because
well, this is one way to interpret it.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of the Socratic method, but I could see a place where that would make sense in like a Sunday school situation where you are like inviting the conversation and the, I don't know. I just think it really is like a limitation. Yes, you want to teach what's like the basic stories, and I also think this is something we just do as people. If we don't have the answer for something, or we feel like we don't have enough information for something, we should be able to say, I need to go and find more resources on this. I don't have this answer. It's kind of like with the whole, like, I want to be respectful of the Jewish tradition, so I don't want to tell you what I remember of a story. I want to go and find, the actual story and go back to that source. So I think that is something we struggle to do with as people. And because we feel like we're in a position where we are asked to know these answers. I think in the Western world, especially in the United States, I think it has something to do with just how we we teach in general for school. Because if you're called upon in school, like, you're expected to know the answer. It's not acceptable for you to go, well, I'm not sure, I didn't really understand that part.
No, it's not like math where 2 + 2 = 4. It's there are some things that are more open to interpretation and discussion. I do believe that the Bible is a book of stories that can give us insight to humanity and to God. And all of a sudden, that feels like, for me, a whole new way of seeing the Bible as fully human and fully divine. But in that moment, just saying that, if we're only looking at it one direction and it has to be X, Y, and Z, then I think we shut down the ability to see God at all. Because it does. If you start looking for just like every answer to be or every question to be answered, it's not there.
Okay, but I think we also this is why I think people who deconstruct and end up not returning to faith and are not returning to whatever religion they were deconstructing from, a lot of them end up being atheists, because we do live in a world where a lot of times, if there is some sort of something out there that we don't know, we can look to science and other methods to figure it out. Whereas that's not true with the way that religion is in general. It doesn't hold up to scientific exploration. Maybe that's not the right way to word it. There's nothing that you can do to measure these things or to find out what the actual truth is to these things. And so that's why I think you get to a place where, like me, where it's like, okay, I believe in like what I know can be proven. Like the earth is round and gravity is a force that we have to deal with and society is racist. I don't know where I was going, but I just was like, what?
Especially U.S. society.
Yes. But I mean, it's not alone. So these are like things that I know to be true. And so it's like, okay, what can I do with what I actually know is true? Because what I can do with these stories in the Bible for the most part is ask questions of like, okay, this doesn't hold up. This question doesn't make sense. Like, why did this happen?
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because I think I know the answer and the distinction, but I wanted to see what your answer would be. What would you say is the difference between knowledge and faith?
Knowledge is something that you can empirically prove in some way. You actually had 2 apples and then you had 2 more apples. You do have 4 apples. Like, we know that that's a thing.
You can
that
see
can
it.
exist. Yeah.
You can touch it.
It's tangible. It's like repeatable.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is that it's consistently repeatable. And that's something you look for in like science when you're doing research. It could be great that you have a study that shows something, but somebody else, when it goes in like peer review, other people should be testing this to see if it works or if it holds up or if the results that you had were like an anomaly. That's, I guess, what it is the knowledge of something that can be done repeatedly, where I don't think, like, faith, I can't say I have faith in something and then like you and somebody watching this can go and test the thing that I said I had faith in and prove it. It's not repeatable. It's not.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The difference between knowledge and faith is knowledge comes from being able to prove it. And faith is based on things we cannot prove. I think a few episodes back you did the faith in the light switch, and it's like, it's not really faith. You know that light's going to work. It's worked 100 times. And the only reason it wouldn't work is if something in the electrical wiring or the light bulb has gone wrong. That's not faith. That's knowledge.
Not necessarily. I don't know. I have like weird feelings about that. Because of the knowledge you have, you think the light will turn on.
And that's fair. I like that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people have faith because they've had experiences in their life. So that leads them to have faith. So I think that works. Shall we keep going?
Yeah.
And when Lot's wife looked back at the city that God was destroying, she was turned into a pillar of salt. And that is why it is important to obey God. Yes, Jimothy. Why did he have to turn her to salt for that? Well, she was warned not to look back, Jimothy, so she brought that on herself. Yes, Jimothy. But if it's so important to God that we make our own choices, then why does he punish us so badly? Well, it's important to him that you have a choice, but it's also important to him that you make the right choice. But sometimes people make mistakes. Why can't he give people a second chance? We can't escape the consequences of our actions, Jimothy. If it's important for us to make choices, then why did he take her choice away and turn her into salt? Because she already made her choice, Jimothy. But if he was going to intervene by turning her into salt, why couldn't he just intervene by making her not look? Well, seems like God cares a lot more about being obeyed than he does about us having a choice. What do you think, Miss Dormpus? I think we need to move on to the next lesson, but I appreciate your enthusiasm so much. But I still had another question. Adam and Eve had 2 sons named Cain and Abel.
So here's one with the Lot's wife thing that I think is interesting. And I really wish I could remember who I first heard this from. I don't. But essentially what they were talking about was Lot and his wife living in the city, and his wife, who I don't even think we ever know her name, she lives in the city with their kids and she's trying to make the best life that she can, and probably all that she has is in that city. And especially because this is going to be in a time where women have no power. They are just property of their husbands. And I think that it's so human to want to look back because you miss it. You're going to miss the only life you knew. And it's like, and it doesn't, and the whole thing about, oh, we're going to turn you to salt, even though it would be like, we just took away your free will for, I don't know, it just, that part does, I get it. I get what, like, and I like what he said about second chances. Like, why don't we have second chances? Why isn't grace more common in these stories?
Well, I think that's a good point. And I would say if you look into the New Testament and look at the Jesus teachings, it's a little bit better and you see more of that. And again, I want to say, I feel like this Old Testament, New Testament, and our current times, we are seeing an evolution of our understanding of God. And there are going to be factions that are traditional and want to cling to the old understanding of God because that's what they're comfortable with and it serves their purposes. They're used to working in a system that, you know, follows certain rules or whatever. But the fact is we should be asking these questions and not be scared to ask these questions. I laugh at a lot of these. I keep thinking of the comedy of Moses, and I think it came out in the 80s, and it was hilarious because they were carrying Lot's wife around, and when they needed salt for
oh my goodness, God, that's so funny.
A little bit of they were chipping it off of her, and you know, and it looked like a statue of salt. You know, it's just like all I can think of. So these Old Testament stories for me, you know, I don't know. I feel so differently about them now.
No, I know. That's part of why I wanted to have this conversation.
I don't know what I would even do with it. If I was a Sunday school teacher today to teach, I wouldn't even want to teach those stories.
You know, I think it's, this is kind of why I wanted to do this, though, is because a lot of it is like a lot of the Old Testament stuff. I can't remember where it goes because it's been long enough since I've watched all of it, that I feel like it's important for people to think of a different way or to see that there's a different way to be in your religion and look at that differently. To be fair, I would like to hear more about like how you think that people who are very gung-ho when this is the truth, they should deal with this and like move out of that or something, because the reality is that some of us have been harmed by this.
How do we move out of it? I love that question. That probably would take me a while to think about.
Yeah.
But my
I wouldn't say
reaction right off the bat, look at Jesus's teaching. If you're calling yourself a Christian, what that means to me, and you can check it yourself, is to follow the way of Christ. The only way you can do that is to look at the stories of Jesus. So really the 4 Gospels.
Yeah, Paul, we don't care that you hate yourself. Sorry, I don't like Paul.
Paul was a trained teacher in Judaism.
I don't like Paul.
So, I mean,
Paul didn't like himself either, so.
I know. And
we have that in common.
There are some writings of Paul that it's like he has gotten a glimpse behind the veil of Jesus' love and he doesn't know what to do with it.
So it's interesting because there's a part where he talks about like why we had to be born in sin in one of these videos that we were watching. And because I'm sorry, I derailed us to Paul. Paul has very much that structure of we are born in sin, we must constantly repent, we must we are never going to be good enough. And this message of you are never going to be good enough is so damaging. And really, I think that is something that I could have probably talked about in our like religious trauma section, because it can be just devastating to be someone who's young and being told essentially, oh, well, we all fall short of the glory of God. And it's like, okay, but
Does that really
make me
inspire
a
you?
bad person?
Yeah,
Like, no,
exactly.
it hurts you. It pulls
Yeah.
you down. And I
Yeah.
know people who still live in that place.
Well, yeah. And I do agree. I mean, I think we could almost have a whole episode about that.
Probably.
I'm going to start going to seminary and getting some additional training because I've only had lay minister training. And so I'm going to get some additional training and become a seminarian. Oh boy. I am curious. I mean, like, I have to make this essay, and I've been really debating. I've got 2 topics. I've narrowed it down to 2 topics, and I'm trying to figure out which one. And one of them has to do with the atonement theology and how that creates shame. And so I've been sitting with that a lot lately and thinking about that a lot because I think that has had a huge impact on our society because we sit here and we're like, well, no matter what you do, it's not good enough. And how destructive that message is. And yet, how do you balance? Like, the flip side is you don't want people having the idea that no matter what you do, it's wonderful. So how do you balance that? How do we understand it? And I wonder if in this age we can begin to have that understanding.
To be honest, that goes back to the values conversation that we had, of that we start building stop building on like instead of focusing so much on the Bible and the stories and these things, it's like, why can't we focus on the things that are important to us, the things that we value? I think that that's the way that you do it, and I think that's how I would argue some of the classes and stuff that I took. I had a textbook called The Good Society in one of my political science classes, and I feel like that was really what that book was about, was how do we build a good society.
Ooh,
And
I'm writing it
there's a
down.
lot of debate about that. I think that the argument should be that we start looking at what do we value. Those values could help us create something very serious. And if we come from a place that we value love,
Yeah.
then we're going to stop focusing so much on you disobeyed or you didn't do this that I wanted you to do. Just working more towards how do I love as unconditionally as humanly possible. Because I feel like I strive for that. I don't know that we can ever get to unconditional love because we're human and we're not perfect.
And I would say part of that is when we love people, we learn how to hold them accountable when they do stuff that's hurtful. So it's not like, again, I love you unconditionally. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that everything you do is okay.
Yeah. And that's not what I meant.
But I think sometimes people get stuck on that because they think, oh, well, then we're just giving people blank carte blanche. And that is not it either. We need to learn how to hold people accountable while loving them and not rejecting them because they did something that was kind of crappy. You know, and so that's part of, I think, why we were wanting to do this.
Yeah.
Is how do you do that?
We've been talking for a while.
Yeah.
I think officially this should be our first 2-part video. And again, maybe it will end up being a series. There are a lot more to respond to if this part goes well. So,
well, and if they're all this funny, I mean,
they are pretty funny.
It's so funny.
It's really well done. I feel like it's very it's obvious that the creator of these TikToks went to Sunday school like, as a child and was like, what?
I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. And the teacher is just yelling at me and slapping my hands.
Yeah.
Figuratively, not literally. I couldn't think of the words.
But, maybe literally if you went to Catholic Sunday school, though.
Oh, this is true.
So,
well, as you face the days ahead, we hope that you have the love and the strength and the support you need for each day.
And maybe the answers to some questions, if they help you feel a little better. Or maybe the energy to want to research questions if you're not sure what the answers are. But thank you for watching and listening, and please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.